Welcome to Adult Forum. I'm Pastor Hilly. This thing we call ministry, it's not a sprint. It's not even a marathon. It's more accurately a relay, passed down person to person, pastor to pastor, and generation to generation. That is our topic for this week's Adult Forum. Ministry, relay, not sprint. And boy, have I reached into the annals of the generational ministry that has brought me to this place for our special guest this week. Before I get to that, a brief reminder that if you enjoy the Adult Forum podcast in the ministry of Faith Lutheran Church here in Whitehall, Ohio, like, subscribe, or share this video, or find the link labeled Giving in the description below to support the ongoing ministries of Faith Lutheran Church here in Whitehall, Ohio. And now, on to our episode. Joining me today is the lead pastor of parish ministry at Holy Trinity Lutheran Church in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. He is an ongoing contributor to our Worship Companion series that we publish out of Faith Lutheran Church here in Columbus, Ohio. And he is one of my earliest mentors in this life and vocation that we call ministry. But more on that later. It's my dear friend, the Reverend Will Rose. Pastor Will, how are you, my friend?
I'm good, Dan. I appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me on. Proud of you and what you're doing, and looking forward to our conversation. Thanks.
Yeah. So we were talking a little bit before this, just catching up on life in North Carolina. At this point in time, you have been vaccinated. You have survived potential storms yesterday, and you get a little solace break as you gear up for your Sunday, right?
Yeah. We're here in Chapel Hill, and so the special part of today is, it's the beginning of March Madness. It's the NCAA basketball tournament, and maybe people filled out their brackets. I don't know if people in your audience, if they filled out a bracket, how far they've brought North Carolina along that bracket, but we play tonight. And this after a horrible season last year and then things shutting down with the pandemic, it really was super weird last March, of course, for a lot of people. But then for UNC basketball fans, it was kind of like, man, what is going on? And then, but a little bit more of a normal year this year. And now that we're back in the tournament, we're breathing a little easier. So a little bit of excitement here in Chapel Hill when it comes to the NCAA basketball March Madness. The church is doing well. We're online streaming. We're part of a weekly clergy covenant group with other churches around Chapel Hill and Franklin Street, where we've worked together since last March to make sure we kind of all stay on the same page and stay in the know when it comes to medical advice and science and what they're saying about the pandemic. So we are now starting to look at what it looks like to regather in person and what that looks like to do both the online streaming to our YouTube page and having people back in the sanctuary. So we're starting to begin to think about those things. We're having a good Lent. We're going to do Holy Week similar to what we did last year when it comes to Easter and Monday, Thursday, and Good Friday and our vigil. We're doing all online. And then after Easter, during the season of Easter, we'll start to think through what it looks like to regather in person. So there's a lot on our plate, but I'm super thankful about a lot of things.
Nice. You guys are having those conversations the same way that we are, and so many congregations across the world, really, as we're in this weird transitional time of doing things both online, whether it's Zoom or Facebook or live streamed, and also trying to re-enter or return to that physical environment. And I read a great book a couple months ago, The Art of Gathering, and the lady who wrote it, her name is slipping my mind right now. It's somewhere behind me. And she makes the great point that if you have a gathering of any kind that is open for everybody, then it's not actually focused and targeted for any one group. And I find a lot of truth in that. And I also know that, for lack of a better phrase, from the performance part of what we do as orators and as preachers, connecting with the computer via Zoom, when I'm trying to, make that connection, like my writing style is different, my nuances are different because I'm connecting. And in the live event in the sanctuary, again, there's a live audience. Me, I'm a big music guy, and you watch home shows and you watch concerts, and the engagement is different. And I think that, and this is just me talking on behalf of myself and no one else, I think that I've been in a lot of conversations where people talk about hybrid ministry, where they go, all right, we want to create one event where everybody can get fed at home or in person, and we want to be able to do both at 100%. But that always worries me because it feels like you're flying like a bunch of flags at half mast.
Right.
You know, it's like buying something that's a printer and a fax machine and a phone and a food processor. But I think that this is the reality that we're all living into.
Yeah. There's definitely like, you know, when you have people in your sanctuary, in your worship space, and you get to read the room, part of my pastoral angst on a weekly basis is that there's somebody out there that needs more attention than they're getting, whether it's pastoral care or they're going through a hard time and don't know about it. And on a weekly Sunday gathering in person, I can read the room and look at people's faces and body posture, and somebody who's normally kind of jovial or happy, if I see that they're kind of their face is down or they're carrying some weight, I can check in with them either that Sunday or that week. Say, hey, I noticed that you were perhaps a little sadder or something was going on. Anything I can help out with? So when you go online, you don't know. Yeah, maybe we have extra views. We have extra family people. We have extra shares. And it's good that we're getting out there. We're broadcasting kind of our brand of how we do worship in Chapel Hill and Lutheranism and our understanding of the gospel. But I'm not seeing what other people are going through and reading the room. So how we do that both. There's a big transition of how moving and growing into doing worship towards a camera and broadcasting. And there'll be another transition in terms of like trying to do both. But the main focus is going to be those in the room, and those viewing from an outside can still see what we're doing if they're on vacation or if they're shut in or if they have connected with us from another state, they can see what we're doing. But of course our focus will be more about those who are in the room. So that balance of how that works. But now that we've learned YouTube Live and Zooming and broadcasting, we can maybe do more conferences or bring in guest preachers or bring in a video of somebody like you. It's like, hey, I'm gonna bring in Dan. We're gonna talk about this subject or Lutheridge or our favorite part of North Carolina, and you could be our stewardship leader for the day or whatever that means in our sanctuary and do both. So there's definitely a challenge. There's in many ways how we regather in person is going to be take a lot more energy and be a little more tough than it was when we kind of shut things down. So.
Oh, I agree. I just had a conversation with the folks here at Faith last night, and one of the comments I made is, for years we had 2 worship times, and the whole conversation back in the day was, do you wake up the kids and take them at 8 or 10 or 9 and 11 or whatever the case may be, and one of the laments of that time in the church life was, well, the people at 8 never saw the people at 10 except for the coffee hour in the middle.
Right.
And I think that at least in my mind, that we're just reframing that, where we're probably going to go back to a 2 worship time reality. But one of those is going to be Zoom based for people who may not be comfortable, may not want to be in the physical space, where the entire focus of that is online connectivity. And the other one would be the in-person worship experience. And then, you put the camera for the person who just kind of wants to watch and not engage. But I think that, again, like, I think those are 3 really distinct realities. So trying to do like a catch-all feels like a really overwhelming task that's not going to give you a good ROI on that. You know what I mean? I don't know.
That's 100%. That's what we're doing too. And I'm trying to coach my folks and even your folks in the church to say, like, pastors absorb and church staff absorb a lot during the week in terms of whether emotional or spiritual heaviness or excitement, but also we field a lot of questions on a normal. So when we get back in to this, I'm like, hey, y'all, be easy on us. We're doing the best we can. If you have a question or if you have a way to do it better, know that we've thought for months on how to do this. And so you coming in and just saying like, hey, why don't we do it this way? Can knock down a lot of work. It's like that Jenga, it's like, hey, be careful with that. And we're not fragile by any means, but I think we just need to work together and be patient with one another in the midst of all this. And we try to figure things out because we haven't been here before and they didn't teach this in seminary. And so how do we do this? And so far my congregation is super great about it. And I have no doubt that they'll continue to be that way when we're in this kind of post-pandemic living in the world and with the church.
Yeah, no, I get that, man. So as you and I are recording this, we are 9 days away from Palm Sunday, which is the kickoff to the Holy Week. We are ending our Lenten journey. And I think for this season of Lent, Lent during a pandemic, because the pandemic kind of shut down Ohio Lent 3 of last year. So we kind of got caught in the middle of it.
Yep. This
year, our whole Lenten journey has been very reflective and in parallel with the pandemic reality. Right. And for the first couple weeks in Lent, first 2 weeks, I was really spending a lot of time focusing on all of those 40 stories in the Old and New Testament. 40 days of the flood, 40 years in the wilderness, 40 days of Jesus being tested by the accuser, as Mark wrote in our RCL this year. But over the past 2-3 weeks, I've become really obsessed with the Exodus story, and specifically the question: did anybody who left Egypt actually make it into the promised land? And this is going to be our jumping off point to a much bigger conversation. But I'd love to just kind of bounce this idea off of you. All right, so I'm a graduate Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago. You're a Southern Seminary, Lutheran Theological Southern Seminary. Different schools, great faculty at both. You have a few more years on me in this thing that we call ministry. I don't know, man. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, you bring up a good question. I've never thought of that. I guess what captures my imagination, or I start to reflect on, is the journey in the wilderness wasn't like we're so our expectations that we what we want or need, we can have it now. It's like if I have a question, I can Google it right now on my phone. I don't have to go to the library. I don't have to get out my encyclopedias, whatever that is. I can have it right now. If I want something to eat, I can go get something fresh and hot right now from a restaurant and have it like that. But this sense of time and waiting, the pandemic has really forced us to slow down and to look at it got real quiet. It got real slow, and people kind of got motion sickness because they were moving so fast. They had to slow down and stop what they were doing. And I think that wilderness story it shows us that it's not immediate. It's not like they were released from slavery and the next day they're happily ever after. There's no happily ever after. It's just like there's this journey of where they're going. And so, there are people who didn't make it all the way through there. And was there anyone who did? And your notes talks about Joshua a little bit, but is there one person who can have that communal memory to pass down to the next generation to let them know what's going on? Is an interesting thing to think about this story. And then when we gather, we're just talking about regathering, that we're going to be different people than where we were a year ago. And some of that difference is going to be good. Hopefully we're reevaluating what's important to us and why those things are important to us and what's important to our faith in our church. But there's also grief. There's also people who were sitting in our pews who died over the last year, either from COVID or from just it was their time to pass away from other means, and they're not going to be sitting in that spot they always sat the last time they were sitting in church. So that collective idea of grieving, of walking through those steps of grief, acknowledging our grief, and then seeing how that transformed us to the next. I think that honing in on that wilderness experience gives us a model of how that's done. There's good times, there's bad times. It takes a long time. It's not immediate, whether it's literally 40 or whether it's extended many, many years in terms of a couple generations moving through. I think it's a good model for us that, it's not going to be back to normal immediately and we just go on about our business. There's going to be a time of transition and remembering and grieving and memorializing and rejoicing and giving thanks. And how do I shake hands again? If we ever shake hands again, how do we give hugs? How do we do the peace? All those things are big questions. And I think that wilderness story, that time, Lent is a good time for that, but then leaning into the wilderness story is really helpful.
Yeah. And especially when we think about the first part of the Exodus story, as well as Noah's the flood, Noah's Ark, which was 40 days, or the tempting of testing of Jesus in the desert. One of the things that I kind of struck on a couple of weeks ago was the fact that none of the characters in any of those stories knew that timeline when they went in. God didn't say to Noah, I'm going to make it flood for 40 days. It flooded, and then we are told that it was 40 days and 40 nights. But right. Noah wasn't told. Jesus is tested, and 40 days later, he comes back, right? So we know that, but Noah doesn't. And I made the comment 2 weeks ago to the podcast guest that I think that in the whole pandemic world, we're closer to day 38 than we are to day 8. But again, we don't know because we're in it.
Yeah, that's strong. That's good. I'm writing that down for my sermon this week. We're closer to day. I mean, today or tomorrow's the first day of spring, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So here, the next Sunday in Lent is the last week of Lent, or as we head into Holy Week, we're closer to Easter than when we began.
Yeah.
And we're closer to the end of this pandemic, hopefully, than we were at the beginning. But that knowledge of what it looks like and all those things, the timeline. Yeah. And we had a clinical psychologist talk with our clergy group that meets weekly from UNC, and he was talking about, anxiety is rooted in unpredictability, not knowing what the future is going to be.
Right.
And then depression is, of course, rooted in loss, and all those things that we've had, that we've lived a year of unpredictability, or we don't know what the future holds, and we don't know what bottom's going to drop out next. And then we've also had a lot of things stripped away from us, whether it's a loved one, or just being able to hug our friend, or our favorite restaurant went out of business. Our conference we were really looking forward to going can't meet anymore, or do it in a different way. So all those things were stripped away. So how do we go ahead and acknowledge those things before we get back together, so that we're a little bit healthier place mentally, physically, spiritually when we get back together?
Because I think that you strike on so many good points there. 3 years from now, we may be able to look back and say, hey, the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic lasted 13 months, which would mean until next month, but we won't know that, like you say, until we're on the other side. And then the way that we process, no one wants to be unhappy indefinitely.
Right.
And we have been caught in this kind of loss, this depression, this kind of ellipsis into a big question mark. And thankfully, I think that with vaccine inoculation numbers rising, that finish line is starting to become a little more visible for a lot of people.
Yeah.
That being said,
and there's so much, in terms of grief or depression or the journey in the wilderness, the scriptures, again, we're living in unprecedented times. We've never been through a pandemic before, but there definitely have a historical evidence that there are other humans have, and they've gotten through it. And then the scriptures have been around. The way that the scriptures and these stories continue to help us get through it, because they've been through it, or the wisdom that they pass along is so rich, and it just adds a different dimension and level to our faith that is very enriching. I've had to choose pandemic or no pandemic. Of course, I choose no pandemic, but what it's presented us with is to go deeper in the scriptures in identity and what's important to us or not, or what I'm truly wrestling with. Where is my grief located, and is it just because my favorite bar shut down, or is it because the people that I know there and meet there, and the fellowship and community that are around there can't be together. So there's all those things to go. It's an opportunity to go deeper.
It is. And speaking of going deeper, I saw a really interesting resource about a week ago. I got the email printed by the fine folks at the American Lutheran Publicity Bureau, who did the For All the Saints reading series back in it was LBW style, because it was the 2-year lectionary that those books are based on. But American Lutheran Publicity Bureau just printed a book called Martin Luther's handbook for how to survive a pandemic.
Right. Yeah. Nice.
The actual text that he wrote. Because if you think about when Luther was born 100 years after the Black Plague and 10 years before the discovery of America.
Wow.
So Luther is living, like, modern Lutheranism is birthed in a post-pandemic world.
Ah, that's good.
Like, historically, that is where Luther comes out of. And I mean, like, that's the whole Hinko Oberman, Richard Marius, Martin Luther, the two Luther biographies, Luther between God and the devil, Luther between God and death, is all based on, is Luther afraid of dying or is he afraid of the afterlife? And they're both kind of spurred on because he's growing up in this post-Dark Ages. Look at all this Gothic art. Be aware, because the Grim Reaper and death is very real in a post-pandemic world.
Yeah, that's strong.
Yeah, it's just cool. It's cool stuff. It's
well,
cool.
There's a sense of solidarity, right? Whether it's the solidarity of those who went through the wilderness, or Luther who's been through it, or people that have been through it in the Spanish flu in the early 1900s. Like, there's a solidarity. It's like, okay, let's see how they dealt this. Let's see how they got through it, and we're in that spot, and we can get through it too.
Yeah. And so, to tie this back in, I think that, one of the things that I really discovered in the past couple of weeks spending this time in the Exodus story is, with the exception of Joshua, and we'll have him as a maybe, and we can talk about the math of all that if we really want to, like, get exegetically nerdy about this. But not only are the Israelites the people of faith, but they are all of the people carrying the entirety of the faith out of Egypt into the promised land. So, like, imbued in that is this sense of urgency that, like, this is their job. This is their risk, because if not them, then who? And the answer is no one. Like, that. And I think that sense of urgency can sometimes go missing in our modern world. And on the other side of that, that sense of urgency, when we're aware of it and when we tune into it, can inspire a number of different ministries about, like, how do we teach the faith to children? How do we strengthen that faith in young adult ministry? How do we continue adult education through our congregations? And so I would love to hear and we can talk about this in a two-part question, pre-pandemic and during pandemic. Like, you and the fine folks at Holy Trinity, what are you guys doing on, like, multiple levels to kind of, like, teach and encourage and support the faith?
Yeah, I think one of our gifts of our congregation is that we have multi-generation, multi-ages as a part of our congregation. Anything from someone just born to someone who's 102, and everything in between. A lot of young families, a lot of professionals, college students, college professors, just for every age group. We did when we did some long-range planning, we looked at our age groups, and we're pretty balanced, like, with every age group. There's not one age group that outweighs the other. The retiree tends to be a little bit larger than the young adults, but as far as, like, we're pretty well balanced. And so that's the gift. But then the challenge is that everybody's busy and is really achievement oriented because we're in a college town, and it's like, I got to do this paper, I got to teach this course, I got to go up the ladder of whatever my vocations tell me I have to climb up. And so everybody's busy. So where do you find Sunday's a big hub? So Sunday mornings was, like, the time when we gathered for worship, and we made opportunities between worship, like you said, 2 different worship services. And there's some who always came to early service and never the 11, and they meet at coffee hour and, like, are you a new member? Like, nope, I've been a member here 20 years. So you're like, so we'd find some Sunday school classrooms or coffee hours. And then our faith formation director would find some intergenerational events after worship, whether it's every person birthday, like you sit at the tables where your birthday month is. And so I'm sitting at the September birthday table with somebody who's 5 years old or 80, and we never knew that we had the same birthday in the same birthday month. So we create those kinds of events. Now, so we had to find some time to do that, other than, the week is so busy for folks. How do we do things during the week and not just Sunday morning and an already crowded, busy Sunday morning? That was a challenge for us. But then, post-pandemic, again, people are seeing us, but I'm not seeing them. And have had a lot of messages say, hey, I really appreciate you. I'm watching on Sunday morning. I like what you said here, but they're not seeing each other. They're seeing me. And I'm kind of the person letting people know what's happening, the lighthouse, pointing them in the direction they need to go. And so that will be the next thing. But then also in terms of Zoom calls and Zoom meetings, I've led a few book studies where if I would have done that at church on a Tuesday night or a Sunday morning, we may have had a handful of people that are there. But now that we're doing this book study through Zoom, like we're meeting now, we're having 20 people, and some are students who moved away and live in Virginia who want to be a part of our book study, and then people who are members of our church, or then some older members who don't drive at night. They're part of the book study with someone who's in college. So that there's ways that we're finding that I'm going to continue to do in the post-pandemic. Yep, we'll still do our Sunday morning hub. We'll do our coffee hours when we're allowed to do that and we feel like it's safe. But I'm going to continue to do Zoom book studies on a Thursday evening and bring people together, because I'll get more people there and have lively conversation with that. So those are kind of two ways that we try to do that. And they'll definitely, we hear of other congregations that are doing good stuff. Nothing's copyrighted, and we're all borrowing from each other. And I think that'll be important, that we can keep those lines of communication open as we're all trying to figure out what that looks like.
I have a great mentor who once said to me that in ministry, we never steal ideas. We just liberate them from one another.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, there's a lot of wisdom in that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
So beyond our active calls, you at Holy Trinity and me here at Faith, let's kind of look more at the generational realities of what we're doing. And we can't do that without talking about Lutheranch. Right. Lutheranch, amazing ELCA camp there at Arden, North Carolina. It's where you and I met in 1995. And I went looking in an old in one of the boxes I've been moving around.
What? Look at that.
Look at this. This is the T-shirt from Camp Formation 1995.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good.
I say, how long has it been since you've seen one of these?
Man, we still do T-shirts for a confirmation camp. We'll get to that. Yeah, I've been in charge of the T-shirts every year for a long time. So I might steal that. The retro look is back. The 90s are cool. We met back in the 1900s, so that's pretty awesome.
It is. Yeah. You were area director, camp director of kind of that area that I was in. Coming at the time, I was a member of Good Shepherd Lutheran Church in Goldsboro, North Carolina. And for me, I'd say that week at Lutheranch for Camp Formation was the first time I ever kind of had that fire for ministry lit or even put on my radar. Yeah. And here we are 26 years later, which is kind of mind blowing. Our friendship is old enough to drink, which is kind of cool, and we're both blessed to be able to do this thing that we do called ministry and live into this vocation. Is it kind of a holy cow moment for you when you realize that kids that you've impacted over a quarter century ago have now entered into this ministry that we share?
You had to say quarter century, right? Yeah, that's good. That is my dad joke for a while. I was like, yeah, back in the 1900s, I used to do these things, and it sounds so long ago. But the connection with Lutheranch, we were talking about this earlier, is that so when I went to camp, Lutheranch, my pastor from St. Matthew's Lutheran in Wilmington, North Carolina, took me to camp all the way from the coast all the way to the mountains near Asheville and Arden, and that I was able to be a camper in cluster number 2 for confirmation camp, and then I became a counselor. And it was really when I was a counselor that I heard my call to ministry too. I'm with you. When I was a counselor at Lutheranch, I saw the difference of you don't have to be this type of particular person to be a pastor or to practice your faith. We all come in different shapes and sizes, all different personalities, introverts, extroverts. Some of us, it's just the diversity of people that was I can still be Will, punk surfer kid who loves comic books and rock and roll or whatever, can still be a pastor. and practice my faith and do that. So that was like the aha moment in Holy Cow for me when I was a counselor. And then so cluster 2 confirmation camp, Lutheran Ridge, was a camper, and then I was an area director when you came and part of with your pastor Rachel Connolly, and then I did my internship at Good Shepherd Lutheran where you were, and Pastor Rachel took me to Lutheran Ridge as kind of a leader with cluster number 2 in that way. And then when I took my first call down in Florida, they invited me to be a part of cluster number 2. So now I'm taking kids to confirmation camp. And when I moved back to North Carolina, this summer, I'm taking kids to camp at Lutheran Ridge in cluster number 2. That's been a part of our lives for so long. And to see this passed down, that there's, for a while there were people that were in our confirmation camp that became counselors at Lutheran Ridge and then became pastors and ministers. And then now I'm seeing like my own daughter apply to be a camp counselor at Lutheran Ridge this summer. And she now passing on the torch to her to be a leader at camp, and perhaps a counselor for cluster number 2. We'll see if that pans out this summer. But yeah, that it definitely is. There are those before me who brought me to camp, and then I was able to minister at camp, and which you were part of. And now in the position of the other way around, like the whole generational thing is there. Is great.
Yeah. And again, like very much kind of like the title of this episode, like ministry, it is a relay. You know, we receive from the people ahead of us, we pass the baton to the people behind us, and, you know, time's arrow marches forward.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was both the most exciting and heartbreaking moment of my, I want to say freshman year of high school, because we found out that you were going to be the intern at Good Shepherd, and we found out my family was moving.
Right, I remember. Yeah,
you know what I mean? Because like we moved before you even showed up. I think our paths at Good Shepherd only crossed like one day.
Right.
You were back in town to visit, and you know, back in the 1900s, in a pre-social media world, like you essentially took me under your wing as a pen pal for like 2 years.
Right, handwritten notes. Can you believe that?
Notes.
We used to do handwritten notes.
I know.
Yeah. And I think that's a good Lent discipline. I mean, we're wrapping up Lent, but I think if anybody's looking for ideas for Lenten disciplines, is maybe do some handwritten cards or notes to folks and snail mail it. During the pandemic, my oldest daughter did that with some of her friends. They were like, you know, let's write letters and put them in the mail. Yeah, it's cool to get some mail. You know, yeah, I like texts and emails and social media stuff, but it is cool to get a handwritten letter that someone took time to do that. It's pretty cool. Yeah, and we did that, and that's great. Now, did you go to camp when you moved away? Did you come back to Lutheran Ridge or was a camper at times?
No, I only went to Lutheran Ridge in '95 for camp formation, and then I did candidacy through North Carolina.
Right.
So I went back and did all the Lutheran Ridge stuff there, but I only had one summer there.
Right. Gotcha.
Yeah. Speaking of Mel, one of my favorite mission trip traditions is I always buy postcards from wherever we end up for the mission trip, and I get kids to write their parents thank you postcards on day 1 of the mission trip, so that those cards get back before we return from the trip.
That's great.
Yeah, and again, what a great way to A, give the parents a memento, and B, like cultivate that reality of thankfulness and giving, you know, those who support us in different ways. And then I get to, you know, educate high school kids that actually postcard stamps are their own thing, and they're cheaper than real stamps.
That's right.
That's a win-win.
Yeah, that's so good.
So when you look back 21 years after your ordination, outside of simply the Lutheran Ridge reality of it, when you look back at the people you've served and like where life has taken them, like I don't know, I don't say 21 years after ordination in a way like, you know, pretty soon we're gonna have to take you out back, man. But I'm just saying at this point in time, like, what are like the joys and the high points of kind of like thinking about the people who you've served across the Carolinas and Florida and that sort of thing? And maybe let me start off by asking you 3 questions in a row. All right. Have you ever been in the situation where you've had the privilege of baptizing and confirming the same person?
I have not had that because I was in my first church in South Florida was only there 4 years. And then the second church in Columbia, South Carolina was there 7.
Okay.
And then I've been here now at Holy Trinity a little over 9. So, and I don't see us going anywhere for a while in Chapel Hill. So there may be an opportunity of those who have baptized, who have gotten into confirmation. But I've not had the baptism confirmation around. Now I know what you're coming up with in a little bit, and I have some other thoughts. But okay.
Have you confirmed and married the same person?
Yes, that I have, and because I was the youth pastor down in Florida, Advent Lutheran, and some of the youth who were in my youth group and went through confirmation and did middle school and high school stuff. They're now in their 30s, and they are having their families and getting married. And I was able to go down and do a wedding for one of my youth who are no longer tied to Advent, but they, went through youth group, went through confirmation, and then I was able to go down and do her wedding. So that was pretty awesome. And then it ended up being like her friends from youth group. It was a nice reunion to kind of see where they've been and where they've gone. And now, because we're broadcasting on YouTube, some of them are tuning into our worship. And I had one message me not that long ago through social media say, yeah, I think I'm going to attend your church on Easter. And I'm like, cool. I want you to find a community, but if you want to tune in to our church on Easter Sunday, yeah, more than welcome. Come be a part of it. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. All right. Third question. Baptized and married?
Not yet.
Not yet. Not yet.
Now there's a potential. There is one of the youth that I did baptize down in Florida. She was like 3 or 4 or 5 when I was down there, and she's now in her mid-20s. I did see that she got engaged. So who knows? She may ask, and she may say, "Hey, do you want to be a part of things?" But yeah, not yet. We'll see. We'll see how things goes for that.
Nice. I seem like when I was in seminary, I seem to get this odd current. I seem to pick up this odd current to the teaching that one of the things that we were kind of like implicitly taught and sometimes explicitly taught was that one of the worst things that we could do to a congregation's life or to a congregational life is to have a long-term pastorate, because it could create a cult of personality or erode a church's ability to be autonomously functioning outside of like air pastor, so to speak. And It wasn't until my first call in Avon, Connecticut, where I served with a head of staff who had been there for 30 years by the time my ministry concluded there, that I saw the beauty and the power of ministry that can happen with that kind of long-term pastorate. Because the Reverend William S. Carter, there were people who he had baptized and married and baptized their kids.
Yeah.
When you see, again, that kind of like generational impact, the way that it echoes through time is just beyond amazing. And we can see that on a parish ministry level by, baptizing, confirmation, marrying, and then like baptizing the next generation of one family. We can see that in outdoor ministry, talking about like Lutheridge and kind of your ripple effect through that. The other thing that really got me into ministry was A, that week at Camp Formation, but B, Trinity Lutheran Seminary, right down the road from where I'm sitting, in 1999 started a program called the Summer Seminary Sampler. And it was 2 3-week sessions, and it was 15 kids from across America. And we did sermon evangelism in the day and sat in on seminary classes at night. So our first week, we led a VBS at First English Lutheran Church, which is probably 6-7 miles from where I'm sitting right now. We worked at food pantries, that sort of thing. And then we got to sit in on, systematics, which is pretty cool when you're 17.
Yeah.
And not only was I year 1, group 1 for that Trinity program, but my last year at my first call, I got to write a letter of recommendation for a girl who was applying to be part of the Trinity Seminary Summer Seminary Sampler program, which again is just mind-blowing.
Yeah.
When we see how things kind of like continue to come around. But I bring up Pastor Carter because Pastor Carter was the one who taught me this idea that ministry is a relay. It's not a sprint. Some days it feels like a marathon, but the reality is it's a relay. We take up the reins from the people who served before us. We pass them off in faith, and we move forward. And we do all these things in good faith.
Yeah, I think it's a stewardship thing. Like, there's definitely your ego could get involved really fast and make it about you really fast, whether it's your legacy or what you want the church to represent because it's tied to you and your work and your self-importance. Like, it could turn inward super fast. And I think that's what the seminaries and our professors were warning us against, to not turn inward with it, that you make it about a marathon for you and you're trying to break some marathon world record. But that idea of turning outward and not making it about your ego, and that it is a relay that you're passing on things. Mm-hmm. Long extended stay ministries can be great and can be healthy. It's the stewardship of it that, and how you're leading the congregation is. I mean, thankfully, I have a good family around me, good wife, congregation members of staff that if it starts to resemble that it's about me and my ego, they'll call me out like super fast. And, so I think that having people around you to help you, keep you in check for those things is great for these long extended, because you don't want a congregation to be all about your wants and what your ego or your vision for things. You want it to be a communal experience. And, sometimes that's part of my pastoral angst as well, is that our congregation likes our staff and trusts our staff, but then they put a lot of things in our hands. And so how do I equip others to run rather than me running the whole race? How do I get people involved in that relay race? How do I continue to pass things on to others so that if anything happened to me, God forbid, whether I leave or something, I pass away or get hit by a truck tomorrow, or whatever, that they can continue the work, that I don't cripple the congregation because I'm the only one who knew the passwords and how to do things, that they can continue with the work that they're entrusted with, that they take ownership of it. So yeah, I think that's kind of my hot take on it as you were talking about those things. But yeah, it can be a beautiful, beautiful relationship experience to do those things. But again, it's how are we being good stewards with the community and relationships that are entrusted to us, and what that looks like.
Because like you're saying, we want the communities to continue, right? Like we want the congregations to be the congregations and the faith to continue to move forward and to be there. And again, to tie this back to the Exodus story, Moses started it out and got him through Egypt, but Moses never set foot in the promised land. He hands it off, and the story of the Old Testament goes a heck of a lot further than Moses.
Yeah, it does.
A lot further, So that being said, one of the benefits that we have now in the 21st century that we did not have in the 1900s, as you so correctly identify that time frame, is social networking. And I've kind of heard you make a few comments about this already in our conversation. But with the ease of social media also comes the challenge of passing off those reins or empowering people to engage where they are, whether we move as clergy, whether they move or transition to new areas in life. You were saying like the potential wedding that you may or may not be part of, you're like, yeah, you feel free to watch at Easter. That's really cool. But you also need to be connected to the area where you are. Thinking about Holy Trinity specifically as a Lutheran church in Chapel Hill with a Lutheran campus ministry aspect to that, how do you find that balance between staying supportive and connected while also empowering both students and parishioners who are transitioning in so many different stages of their lives?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's super fluid. There's no like one answer. It's kind of discernment of, because we have people that are part of our ministry for just 4 years because that's when they're in college and they go on. Then we have people move in who are going to grad school, the people who are getting their doctorate. We have professors who come in for a little while and do a postdoc and then they move. So there's always coming and going and transition with our congregation. So I know when I grieve that a family is moving, I'm like, man, I'm so bummed. I really love that family, but they're going to the next stage of their life. And then, but then there might be another family that moves in because they are moving into the area because they got a job, or they're going to school or teaching. And yeah, they get connected with our social media, with our YouTube channel, or they friend me on Facebook, and then we're friends. But there is, I say again, like with long-term pastorships, you gotta be a good steward and not let it be about your ego, that you're like, hey, I'm passing on. I will continue to be your friend. We're connected. We have a relationship. But find a community, find a church, find a pastor you trust that she can help lead you in your ministry, and your growth of faith, and how you develop your vocation. And it is like, hey, you're entrusted to us for a little bit of time, and then go out and flourish. While we can still stay connected. So there's a balance there. I can see where boundaries can get crossed, because you're like, you don't want to like steal people's sheep or like get in the way of them flourishing somewhere else. But you also want to have a healthy relationship we can help guide along the way. That if somebody leaves or moves somewhere, who's going to have some questions, they can reach out to me on social media and go, hey, do you know of anybody or colleagues or friends who are in this area you can connect with? I'm like, yeah, let's see what I can find. So it's a balance there. But yeah, I mean, social media, there is a friend that I went to middle school with who we connected on social media, and she found out that she likes comic books and like Walking Dead and like these movies as well. And then we ended up meeting up I was like, oh, well, there's a North Carolina Comic-Con. You should come down and like volunteer. And maybe I knew she's a person of faith and her family. I was like, come down, let's do a panel together and talk about the intersection of faith and fandom and all things comic book geeky. And so we would have never connected if it hadn't been for that social media. And then you enlarge that space of where we can do ministry together in the space that we find common. So I found it, again, is how are you a good steward? Of course, social media can be toxic. Message boards can be nutty. But again, is how are you being a good steward? Same way with money, same way with alcohol, same way with anything. How are you being a good steward and being temperate and thinking through healthy ways of engaging this in the same way with social media? And I do think, talking about like generations, like the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, all the beware stuff was like, all right, you're being marketed to by these companies and commercials who are trying to manipulate you to buy their product, and that you're less of a person if you don't use this toothpaste or buy this car. That was I remember that growing up, was like, yep, they're marketing to you, but beware and think critically about what the message they're trying to say.
Right.
And I think the same way with social media, we can easily get in our algorithms and echo chambers, and we get around with these people who we think alike, and then we feel like the rest of the world is wrong. How do we diversify that group and not get manipulated by those algorithms to push us in groups or push in directions that we don't necessarily want to go in or feel is a healthy way to go in? So I think the same critical thinking that goes with like marketing and being manipulated, the same thing can go into social networks and social media. To think critically and to think through those things is a very big gift, is how we're connecting now in the midst of, but also be aware those algorithms are trying to be manipulated to push you into echo chambers or places that aren't necessarily healthy for community.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. It was Adam Duritz of the Counting Crows had this great quote about getting online and, people yelling at one another. And he goes, the internet's kind of like standing there and yelling down a hole. And then when you actually stop to listen, you realize that all you hear are the echoes of an idiot yelling in a hole.
Right.
And I'm like, yeah, that's it. So that being said, with social ministry, thinking between all of your years at Lutheridge internship and years of ministry, do you have any like out of the blue, just like really fun stories about like, oh, and this person out of the blue made this connection, or things were able to happen in a way that caught you off guard, but were just really positive?
Yeah, I think, well, it is amazing to me. I mean, I'm friends with people in social media of those who I was counselors with at Lutheridge. And then there are those who are, campers who are now connected with, and we're just again, tying it back to like your idea of the generations passing from one to the next, so the different people that are interconnected. There's this thing on Facebook that talks about mutual friends. Like you can look and see underneath them, this person, you have 8 mutual friends with this person. You have 52 with this person. People I went to seminary with and worked at Luther Ridge with, there'll be hundreds of mutual friends.
Oh, wow.
Because there's this wide web of connections between our journey from college, camp counselor, to then seminary, to then ministry. So all of those things are just so great. So it's fun to go look and see those mutual friends and connections that you all have.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I want to thank you so much for your time. I want to be aware of that. I want to take up your whole morning. But if you have one more minute, I have 7 fast questions for you. Off the top of your head. Are you ready?
Fire away.
DC or Marvel?
Marvel, but I really love Batman.
Fair. Favorite ocean?
Oh, man. Atlantic. That's where I grew up. South end of Wrightsville Beach.
That's
Atlantic Ocean, south end of Wrightsville. Yeah.
Favorite gospel?
Depends on the season. But I guess, man, I got to go with Luke.
Okay. Favorite comic book movie?
Oh, man, that's tough. Oof. Again, it depends on what kind of mood I'm in. But since the Falcon and Winter Soldier episode 1 came on Disney Plus, I'll have to say Captain America and the Winter Soldier. That one's super good.
Nice. Favorite ACC team? Oh.
I was brainwashed. I was brainwashed by my dad. He went to Carolina, and I learned all my great cuss words watching Carolina basketball games with him. And it's so ingrained in me that even when Coach K at Duke was coaching the U.S. Olympic team a few years back, it was hard for me to pull for the U.S. basketball team because Coach K was. I was like, is there a way that they could both lose and win? Like, how can Coach K lose and the USA team win? I didn't know. So that was an internal wrestling with me with that.
I get that. My brother is a dyed-in-the-wool State fan, State alum, yada, yada, yada. He now also works for IT at Duke, and it kills him every day.
Yeah, it's hard. They got a great div school. Yeah, if my daughter's got a scholarship and went there, I'd say go there in a heartbeat. We have a member who teaches particle physics at Duke and was a part of the Higgs boson team that discovered the God particle, and I'm like, great, you guys are doing great stuff, but I'm still going to pull against your basketball team.
All right. Favorite game, board game or otherwise?
I think I'm of the Atari generation. So I grew up playing Atari, and there's a game, Defender. I played that game so much, Defender. And there was a stand-up arcade game as well, Defender. And then if we're going to go video game, I also love Galaga, video game from the 80s. There's a retro bar here in Chapel Hill that so far has survived the pandemic, and they just opened up their indoor playing video games. And so, Galaga. But I also like Settlers of Catan is a great board game.
Nice. All right, last question. Favorite part of being a pastor?
I'm a big people person and relational person and extrovert. So really it's the people. I mean, people can be hard and messy and complicated, but also being with people in different stages of their life and the sacred ground of walking with them in their different stages, the highs and the lows, is a great honor and privileged, and I'm humbled by it on a daily basis.
Nice. Pastor Will Rose, thank you, man. Thank you for 26 years of friendship. Thank you for everything you do for the people of Holy Trinity, despite the fact that that's in Chapel Hill. And thank you for your time this morning. I appreciate it, my friend.
Thanks, Pastor Hilly. I'm very proud of you and what you're doing, man.
Thanks so much, my friend. We'll catch you soon.